When people think of off-meta stuff, they generally think anything that's considered low tier, things that are like not worth using and just aren't good at anything that they do. And while that can kind of be true, things that are off-meta aren't all necessarily low tier, and low tier weapons can almost always be off-meta. The reason why something could be considered off meta is simply because it's not the best option, where a low tier is usually something that's generally not a good option at all. Something that's off meta can still be a decent option, just not the best option, if that's an easy way of saying that. So the question is, can off meta be a viable solution to playing the against the meta, I guess? Now, originally back in Splatoon 1, I played for a team called Speedruns Live, and playing sort of off meta was our thing. It was something we did pretty much all the time, and it worked for us. So, can off meta actually be a viable solution, and is it actually worth doing now? So, let's say you and your team don't really care for any of the top tier weapons that are being played right now, stuff like the Kensa Splattershot Pro or the Ballpoint Splatling, but you still want to compete at a high level. You have the option of either just conforming and playing what's high tier, or you can play options that are just not as good and seeing if you can make that work. There actually is some reason behind why you would want to play something that's off meta, and it also gives some credit to some stuff that's considered low tier, and that's the unknown factor of it all. Now, this is something that's not as common now as it would have been in Splatoon 1 back when SRL did this, but now a lot of weapons in this game had almost had their chance to shine at some point. Hell, even the arrow spray was meta for a little bit. So the chance of you catching someone completely off guard isn't as common now as it would have been maybe in Splatoon 1, but there's still that factor of something that people might not have as much experience against, or it's been too long since they've had some experience against it. That's where you get the advantage, and that's actually how we got the advantage back in those days. As someone that plays something that's off meta or a low tier weapon, chances are you're going to be spending most of your time playing against the meta weapons. If you're playing solo and you're playing something like the arrow spray, chances are you're going to be playing against a lot of ballpoint splatlings or against the Splattershot pros or anything else that's meta at the time. And while you're sitting there learning a bit about how that matchup works, how you could do something with the arrow spray against those weapons, those solo queue players are just looking at you as some random idiot that's playing something that's not good and don't really care and write you off. And then when it comes time to actually apply that knowledge into a scrim or a tournament, you have some basis of that matchup to apply in a tournament and serious setting. That's one simple thing from playing an off-meta weapon. Chances are you're going to gain some experience playing against everything that is good and everything that is meta just by virtue of playing. And by doing that, you'll obviously, like I said, learn the matchup and learn how certain weapons play around what you're doing. Then, when you get into a more serious setting, chances are those people have been grinding away at playing their high level weapons and playing against other people playing that high level weapon, that you might actually catch them off guard. It's not guaranteed, but it's certainly something that can come up. So let's jump back to the question at hand. Can playing off meta be viable? And it's actually very situation dependent. Because like I said, almost everything in the game has had a chance to shine somewhat nowadays. It's it's not likely you're going to catch someone completely off guard by using it. However, the idea of playing to your strengths rather than playing to the strengths of the meta can come up in this situation. If your team just isn't strong enough or isn't confident enough the ability to play something that's considered a high tier, maybe it is wiser to play to the strengths of what they can do and try to make the most of what it is that your team is capable of playing. This might not be the most optimal route, however, it might be something that will work for you in the end, like what it did with SRL. Playing to our own individual strengths and what we were good at ended up doing us a lot of good, surprisingly, as opposed to just playing what was good at the time. There is some value in playing to everyone's strengths because it puts them in a better mood. They're going to be more aware. They're going to be able to, be more confident in how they're playing. They know a lot more about what they're playing, and they just go into a match knowing how things are going to work out in their favor. And they have this general idea of how things are going to go, and they have their own little like playbook essentially. They know like, okay, I play this all the time, so I know the routes I take on this map, what I do on this map, my strats, my angles, all this stuff. Those sort of things that if someone's trying to pick up a new weapon or play something that's just meta, they might not know as quickly or just don't really put as much time into it because they don't enjoy the weapon. So the idea of playing to someone's strengths can actually be very helpful in a situation where just playing the meta either isn't a good option for you or you just don't want to do it. Now, will this always work? No, not at all. The chances of it succeeding are a little bit lower than the chances of it failing, simply because the chance of catching someone off guard or putting them in an unknown matchup are kind of slim. I think certain weapons in the game have sort of far gone past the point of when they were relevant or when they were deemed useful to where certain picks could catch someone off guard. Like, I think right now, if someone were to get really good at, like, the Clash Blaster, per se, and start to appear in tournaments playing that at a pretty high level, chances are there's going to be some people that don't quite understand what to do against it or how to handle it. I mean, most people that are listening to this now are probably thinking, lol, just back up and shoot it. But that's you're just looking at that from one angle. If someone that's, a random solo queue warrior is playing Clash, they might just WM1 into you, hold forward, and just keep shooting. But someone that tries to actually utilize the weapon and make the most of it might have a little bit more to do and a few more tricks up their sleeves. That's just something that comes along with trying to master something and maximize the use of something. And something that doesn't get used very often means that it's just not a known matchup. And then people come to just base their opinions and thoughts on how to do something based on the few people they've seen use it, which in a case of like a Clash Blaster, it's probably just solo queue players. They don't think that the solo queue player is going to do anything good with it. They see you in a tournament playing it, and they think that you're probably just as the same level as that solo queue player. And then before people start to get the wrong idea, I'm not trying to say that playing purely off meta is a good way to go. If a team is looking to truly be competitive and truly reach the top of the game, they should use at least a few of the top weapons. And there's a good reason why those weapons are considered the meta. There's something about them where, with the current weapons or what's good at the time, just doesn't do a good enough job against them. Or that there are just certain options that are just better than anything else that's available at the time. But that doesn't mean an off-meta weapon can't be a good choice. While even stuff like the ballpoint splatling, like I mentioned, is seeing a lot of use right now, there's actually a decent amount of things that can do something against the ballpoint that most people aren't exploring, simply because they just aren't considered the best options at this time. They're still a good option, but they're not the best option, and that's why they are seeing less playtime. The experimenting with playing something that could be considered off meta, as I said, not just because might be a low tier, but it's just not the best option, could result in playing against something that is effective for you rather than what's effective for them. You could find something that's considered off meta, but might do a very good job at fighting off ballpoint spotlings or Kensa pros, something like that. It might not be a low tier weapon, but it might just be something that's not at the forefront of the game's meta. So in conclusion, can off meta be viable? Yes and no. Yes, because it's situational based. Certain things can be applicable in certain situations, and playing with your team and playing to their strengths can be very valuable over just playing what's good, especially if it's a confidence booster for those playing the off meta weapons. And sometimes the off meta weapons can actually be good picks against things that are just meta due to them just not being explored. And then no, because there's a good reason why meta weapons are the meta. They sometimes just have no disadvantages, or might not have very obvious disadvantages that can be exploited through other weapons. Ultimately, it comes down to deciding whether or not playing off meta is the best choice for you or your teammates. If you just aren't confident in playing what's considered the meta, then maybe playing to your strengths with something that could be considered off meta is good. Or maybe you want to explore options that just aren't at the forefront and see if there's something that is considered off meta that could be a good solution to something that is meta. Like I mentioned, there could be something good that could stop a ballpoint splatling, but just not considered meta. That would make it off meta, but that doesn't necessarily mean it would be a low tier weapon. So I want to thank everyone for watching, and I will see you all next time.